March 18, 1984. A typical Sunday evening in Osaka, Japan turned into the beginning of one of the country's most chilling mysteries. At the headquarters of Glico Foods, one of Japan's largest confectionery companies, a security guard made his routine checks. Everything seemed normal until he found something unusual, a single envelope. Inside was a letter that would spark a wave of terror across the nation. The letter was unlike anything they had seen before. Written in a distinctive style, mixing Japanese characters with a childlike scrawl, it contained a terrifying message. The writers called themselves the Monster with 21 Faces, a name taken from a famous Japanese detective novel. But this was no work of fiction, this was real. And it was just the beginning. But to understand why this letter sent shockwaves through Japan, we need to step back 2 weeks earlier. On March 3rd, something even more disturbing had happened. 8 masked men broke into the home of Katsuhisa Izaki, the president of Glico Foods. In the dark of night, they tied up his family and kidnapped him at gunpoint. For 3 days, Izaki was held in a warehouse, bound and confined in darkness. Then, mysteriously, he managed to escape. The police were baffled. In the 1980s, Japan, violent crime was rare. The country prided itself on being one of the safest nations in the world. Corporate kidnappings? Threatening letters? This wasn't just a crime. It was an assault on Japan's sense of security and order. The monster with 21 faces knew exactly what they were doing. Their first letter wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration of war against corporate Japan. They weren't interested in just money. They wanted something far more valuable. They wanted to create fear, and in the coming months, they would succeed in ways that would change Japan forever. As news of the letter spread, the Japanese public was captivated. Who were these mysterious criminals? What did they want, and why had they chosen Glico Foods as their target? The answers would prove more disturbing than anyone could have imagined, as the monster with 21 faces was about to unleash a campaign of terror that would target not just one company, but the entire Japanese food industry. In the days that followed, every major newspaper in Japan carried the story. Security at food companies across the country was increased. Police launched one of the largest investigations in Japanese history, but the monster with 21 faces was just getting started. They had more plans, more threats, and more surprises, and they were about to show Japan just how vulnerable its sense of safety really was. The monster with 21 faces wasn't satisfied with just sending threatening letters. In April 1984, they struck again, this time targeting Glico's products directly. They announced they had poisoned the company's candies and snacks with potassium cyanide. Grocery stores across Japan rushed to clear their shelves. Parents frantically checked their children's candy. The nation held its breath. Glico Foods was losing millions of dollars every day. Their products, once trusted and loved, now sat untouched in warehouses. The company had to destroy hundreds of thousands of products just to be safe. Television news showed massive piles of candy and cookies being burned. For many Japanese people, these images were shocking. They had never seen anything like this before. The police were working around the clock, but the monster with 21 faces seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. They left letters in public places, called the media with threats, and even sent taunting messages to the police. Each time the authorities thought they were close, the group slipped away like ghosts. Then came the photographs. The monster with 21 faces started sending pictures to the media, photos of Glico products they claimed to have poisoned. These weren't just random threats anymore. They were showing Japan that they could access any product, anywhere, at any time. The public's fear turned to panic. How could anyone feel safe buying food anymore? But the most unsettling part was the way they communicated. Their letters were written in a playful, almost childlike tone, as if this was all some kind of game. They called the police poor little detectives, and bragged about how they couldn't be caught. They even gave themselves nicknames, with their leader calling himself the Fox-Eyed Man. In one famous letter they wrote, "Dear dumb police officers, don't tell a lie. All crimes begin with a lie, as we say in Japan. Don't you know that?" The mocking tone of their messages infuriated the police, but fascinated the public. Every new letter made headlines, and people began to wonder if these criminals were more clever than the authorities. The police set up hundreds of checkpoints and cameras around Glico facilities. They interviewed thousands of people. They even tried to trace the letters and photographs, but the monster with 21 faces seemed to know their every move. Sometimes, they would warn the police exactly where they would strike next, and still, nobody could catch them. By summer 1984, Japan was gripped by a kind of fear it had never known before. This wasn't just about contaminated candy anymore. The monster with 21 faces had exposed something deeper, the vulnerability of Japan's safe, orderly society. And they weren't done yet. In fact, they were about to expand their terror campaign in ways that would shock the nation even more. Just when Japan thought the terror couldn't get worse, the monster with 21 faces suddenly changed their game. In October 1984, they announced they were done with Glico Foods. The company had suffered losses of more than $21 million, and thousands of employees had lost their jobs. But instead of disappearing, the mysterious group found new targets. Their next victim was Morinaga, another major Japanese candy company. The pattern was familiar, but this time, they refined their tactics. They didn't bother with kidnapping. Instead, they went straight to psychological warfare. Letters began appearing in stores across Japan, warning that Morinaga products had been laced with deadly chemicals. They even told people exactly which stores had the poison candy. The most frightening part? They started placing tampered products directly on store shelves. They marked these packages with the words, "Danger contains poison," in childlike handwriting. Police found dozens of these marked packages in stores across Japan. Testing showed that some actually contained toxic chemicals. This wasn't just a threat anymore. It was real. The police response was massive. Over 800,000 police officers were now involved in the investigation, the largest criminal investigation in Japanese history. They checked every security camera, interviewed every witness, and analyzed every piece of evidence. But the monster with 21 faces seemed to be laughing at their efforts. In one shocking incident, police spotted a suspicious man near a Morinaga warehouse. He was described as having eyes like a fox, matching the description of the group's mysterious leader. Officers chased him through the streets, but somehow he managed to escape on a bicycle. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. This only added to the group's mysterious legend. The media coverage reached fever pitch. Every day, newspapers and TV stations reported new developments. The Japanese public was both terrified and fascinated. Some people even began to admire the group's ability to outsmart the authorities. But for the food industry, this was a nightmare that seemed to have no end. Companies started hiring food tasters to check their products before shipping them to stores. Security guards watched every step of the manufacturing process. But still, the monster with 21 faces found ways to breach these defenses. They seemed to know every weakness, every gap in security. It was as if they had inside knowledge of how these companies operated. The letters kept coming, each one more taunting than the last. "Dear stupid police officers," one read, "don't lie to the public. You know you can't catch us. Why not give up?" The group's confidence was growing, and with each success, they became bolder. Japan watched in horror as its proud police force seemed powerless to stop them. By early 1985, the monster with 21 faces had Japan's entire food industry in a stranglehold. After Morinaga, they targeted other major companies, Marudai Foods, House Foods, and Fujiya. Each company received the same threatening letters, the same warnings about poisoned products. The pattern was familiar, but the stakes kept getting higher. The economic impact was devastating. Food companies were spending millions on security measures. Sales plummeted as consumers became too scared to buy packaged foods. Some parents started making their own snacks at home, rather than risk buying anything from stores. Small shops that relied on selling candies and snacks were going out of business, but the psychological impact was even worse. Japanese society, which had always prided itself on safety and order, was crumbling under the weight of fear. People started questioning everything. Who could they trust? Was their food safe? How could a group of criminals outsmart thousands of police officers? The monster with 21 faces had achieved something remarkable. They had shaken Japan's confidence to its core. The police were under intense pressure. Every day, newspapers criticized their failure to catch the criminals. The investigation had become an obsession for many officers, especially Superintendent Yamamoto of the Shiga Prefecture Police. He worked day and night, barely sleeping, determined to solve the case that was haunting the nation. Then came the most disturbing letters yet. The monster with 21 faces started writing about specific police officers by name. They knew personal details about the investigators. They even seemed to know about private conversations that had happened behind closed doors. It became clear that they either had inside information or were watching the police very closely. The media frenzy reached new heights. Television shows hosted special segments trying to analyze the group's psychology. Experts debated their motives. Were they former employees with grudges, professional criminals, political activists? Every theory seemed possible, yet none could fully explain the group's actions. The letters themselves became more bizarre and theatrical. Sometimes they included riddles or hints about their next target. Other times, they just mocked the police's failures. "Dear dumb police," one letter read, "you haven't caught us yet? We thought you were Japan's finest. Maybe you need to try harder." But the most chilling development was how the group seemed to be everywhere at once. They could leave threatening letters in different cities on the same day. They could plant poisoned products in stores hundreds of miles apart. It was as if they had an invisible network spread across all of Japan. The police were chasing shadows, and the shadows were winning. August 1985 brought the darkest turn in the investigation. After 16 months of relentless pursuit and constant failure, Superintendent Yamamoto of the Shiga Prefecture Police made a devastating decision. On August 10th, following another taunting letter from the monster with 21 faces, he drove to Mount Hiei, a sacred mountain near Kyoto. There, he committed suicide by setting himself on fire. Yamamoto left a note saying he had failed in his duty to protect the public. His death shocked the entire nation. Here was a respected police officer, driven to such desperation by his inability to catch these criminals. The monster with 21 faces had claimed their first and only victim, not through poison, but through psychological warfare. The response from the mysterious group was unexpected. 5 days after Yamamoto's death, they sent their final letter. It was different from their usual taunting messages. The president of Glico Foods has gone through many hardships, they wrote. We decided to give him a rest. We are bad guys who do bad things. And just like that, they disappeared. No more letters, no more threats, no more poisoned products. The monster with 21 faces vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared. After terrorizing Japan's food industry for nearly a year and a half, they simply walked away, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. The timing of their disappearance led to intense speculation. Did they feel guilty about Yamamoto's death? Had they achieved their mysterious goals? Or did they simply get bored with their game? The police continued their investigation, but leads grew cold. Witnesses disappeared. Evidence dried up. The final letter felt almost like an apology, but it explained nothing. Who was the fox-eyed man? How had they managed to outmaneuver Japan's entire police force? How many people were really involved? These questions would haunt investigators for decades to come. The scale of their operation had been massive. They had targeted multiple major companies, planted poisoned products across the country, and consistently evaded one of the world's most sophisticated police forces. Yet somehow, they had done it all without leaving behind a single useful piece of evidence. Japan's food industry slowly began to recover, but something had changed forever. The case had exposed vulnerabilities that nobody had previously imagined. It showed how a small group of determined criminals could bring giant corporations to their knees and make an entire nation question its sense of security. Today, nearly 40 years later, the case of the monster with 21 faces remains one of Japan's most puzzling, unsolved mysteries. The statute of limitations expired in 1995, meaning that even if the perpetrators were identified today, they couldn't be prosecuted for their crimes. But their impact on Japanese society has never faded. The case changed Japan in profound ways. Companies completely revamped their security systems. The food industry introduced tamper-proof packaging that we still see today. Many of these safety measures became global standards. In a strange way, the monster with 21 faces forced the entire food industry to become safer, but the psychological scars run deeper. The case shattered Japan's image of itself as an unshakable, crime-free society. It showed that even in a nation famous for its law and order, mysterious criminals could operate with seeming impunity. For many Japanese people, it marked the end of an era of innocence. Theories about the group's identity continue to circulate. Some believe they were disgruntled former employees of food companies. Others suggest they were professional criminals, or even a foreign organization. A popular theory claims they were connected to the Japanese Yakuza, but no concrete evidence has ever emerged to support any of these theories. The fox-eyed man, the group's supposed leader, has become almost a legendary figure in Japanese crime history. The only clear description of him comes from that one police chase, where officers reported seeing a man with eyes like a fox escaping on a bicycle. Was he really the mastermind, or just another piece in the group's elaborate game of deception? Perhaps most disturbing is how the case highlights the power of fear. The monster with 21 faces never actually killed anyone directly. Their power came from their ability to create panic, to make people question the safety of their food, to shake confidence in authority. They showed how vulnerable modern society really is to psychological warfare. The case has inspired countless books, documentaries, and TV shows. It's studied in criminology classes as an example of sophisticated criminal psychology. But for all the analysis and speculation, the true identity of the monster with 21 faces remains a mystery. Their actual motives, their real purpose, may never be known. In their final letter, they called themselves bad guys who do bad things. But were they really just bad guys? Or were they something more complex? A mirror held up to society's vulnerabilities? Whatever their true nature, they left behind a legacy that continues to fascinate and frighten people around the world. The case of the monster with 21 faces serves as a reminder that sometimes the greatest mysteries are not who committed a crime, but why they did it, and why they chose to stop. In the end, perhaps that's what makes this case so endlessly intriguing. Not just the questions it raises, but the answers we may never find.